Hey, fifth graders. It's Miss Sumbo again. I know there was one person that was tuning in live to the last read aloud that I had to cut short about 5 minutes in so you can see I'm sitting outside because it's a nice sunny day, a little chilly, a little breezy, but the sun is too good to pass up. So I had to stop my read aloud. I was a couple pages in because I actually just got a Amazon Prime delivery. But the delivery, the man who was making the delivery, he had his music playing very loudly in his truck. And the music was not the most appropriate. So I decided to end the read aloud and I deleted that video and we're going to start fresh here. So whoever was watching that one live, sorry about that. Back again, take two. So a quick little recap. We left off at our last read aloud at the end of chapter 8, where Martine had seen the White Giraffe through her bedroom window, and she has decided to take the risk in the middle of the night without her grandmother's permission to go out in the game reserve and try to find the White Giraffe. So take 2, chapter 9. Out in the garden, the storm had slowed to a drizzle. Confronted with the sights and smells of the African night, Martine's courage almost deserted her. Had her grandmother's bedroom light not come on right at that very moment, she would have rushed back inside. But it did. Martine decided if she had the choice between her grandmother and a hungry lion, she'd rather take her chances with the lion. The air was perfume sweet with the scent of fallen mangoes and gardenia blossoms. Martine set off blindly through the dripping trees in the general direction of the game park gate. The one useful thing she'd overheard during her investigations the previous week had been Tendai telling her grandmother the new code for the padlock. She'd made a point of committing the numbers to memory. When her hands touched the cold metal gate, she felt for the heavy chain that bound it and the lock that secured it. Only then did she switch on her flashlight and enter the numbers on the wet dial. The padlock clicked open. Martine stared down at it, unable to believe that it had been so easy. She realized that she'd been secretly hoping all along that something would happen to prevent her from going into the game reserve. She glanced over her shoulder. Once more, the house stood in darkness. Whatever happened now, there was no turning back. Martine stepped through the gate and stifled a cry of terror. 2 red eyes glared at her. The bushes shook violently, and a water buck sprang up so close to Martine that its fur actually brushed her. With a shake of its horns, it bounded away into the blackness. Martine's heart smacked wildly against her ribcage. She tried to imagine what Tendai would do in a similar situation. Not that he was likely to be in a similar situation. But if he were, she was sure that everything would be about staying calm and thinking clearly. Focus, she thought. I have to focus. I can do this. More than anything in the world, she wanted to find the White Giraffe. Why? She wasn't sure. She just knew she had to do it. And as frightened as she was just doing something for herself and rebelling, even in a small way, against the stifling atmosphere of her grandmother's house, made her feel good. The beam from her flashlight picked out the path that led down to the watering hole, where the frogs were competing in a noisy chorus. Blue lightning shuddered over the mountains on the far horizon. Martine set off as quickly as she dared, trying to avoid the puddles. Even so, her jeans were soon soaked through. In places the grass was taller than she was, and cold droplets drenched her hair and ran down her neck. As she walked, unseen creatures slithered and scurried and hopped away through the undergrowth. Martine tried not to imagine the worst. She wasn't sure which she was most scared of, snakes and creepy crawlies, or man-eating carnivores, but she fervently hoped that she didn't meet any of them. After what seemed an age, the temperature dropped and she saw she'd reached the water's edge. She tried to pinpoint the exact spot where she'd seen the giraffe. She was pretty sure it had been beside the old gum tree that stood, like a startled skeleton, on the left bank of the water hole. As if sensing danger, the frogs fell silent. Tendrils of mist hovered over the water, and the night air was laden with threat. Martine quelled the butterflies in her stomach. She'd come too far to go back now. She lifted her flashlight and shined it into the surrounding bush. Nothing moved. Not a mouse, not a lion, not even a bird. Disappointment hit her like a blow. What had she been thinking? A mythical giraffe. She'd risked her life in pursuit of a fairy tale, and now she had to try to get home in one piece. Sheer instinct warned Martine something was behind her. The same sixth sense that told her to turn around very, very slowly. A Cape cobra was coiled in the mud barely 6 feet away from her, hood spread wide, swaying in the yellow light. Martine recognized it immediately as one of the most poisonous snakes in Africa. Its golden coloring was unmistakable. So was the band around its throat. The cobra's lips parted and its black tongue flickered out evilly. Martine dropped her flashlight in panic. It rolled behind a boulder and dimmed to a faint glow. Then it went out. In the split second before she was plunged into darkness, Martine saw the cobra draw back its head to strike. Helplessly, she waited for its lethal bite. It never came. Instead, a pale blur exploded from the trees. There was a hideous hissing sound and the flash of flying hooves. The last thing Martine saw before she crumpled to the ground was the white giraffe. Something was tickling Martine's face. Something that blew warm, sweet air, reminiscent of a freshly mown lawn on a summer's day in England, or strawberries at Wimbledon, or the Rose Garden at Greenwich Park in London, which she had visited one spring on a school trip. There was something else in the scent, too. Something wild and exotic and African. Africa! Martine suddenly came to and realized that she was not dozing in the hammock in her garden in her safe suburban England home. She had illicitly entered a South African game reserve in the middle of the night, and something was sniffing at her and possibly preparing to eat her. Cautiously, she opened one eye. A pair of liquid black eyes, framed by impossibly long lashes, stared down at her. "You saved my life," she said. The white giraffe drew back with a nervous snort. It gave a half rear, like a horse, and retreated to a safe distance. Martine climbed carefully to her feet. The white giraffe towered over her. The sky had cleared a little, and in the dim light of the watery moon, Martine could see it was an immensely beautiful creature. Its coat shimmered like sunlit snow, and it was patterned all over with patches of silver tinged with cinnamon. She reached out her hand to it, and it wheeled around and made as if to flee before sliding to a halt, breathing hard and shaking. The wildlife book in her room had explained that although giraffes are basically very gentle creatures, they are quite capable of using their long front legs to kick with force if they feel threatened. But something told Martine that this particular giraffe would never hurt her. She reached out her hand again and took a couple of steps toward it. "It's all right," she said soothingly. "It's all right. I only want to stroke you, not to harm you." This time the giraffe stood still. When her fingers made contact with its skin, it quivered with fear, but didn't move away. Martine felt a tingle of electricity run up her arm, the same tingle she'd felt when Grace had put a hand on her forehead. In that instant, she had a strange sense she knew exactly what the animal was thinking. She knew, for example, without having any idea why, that his name was Jeremiah, Jemmy for short. And she knew that Jemmy was lonely, every bit as lonely as she was. "I'm alone too," Martine confided to the giraffe. 5 weeks ago, I lost everything I loved in a fire in England. Now, I live with my grandmother who doesn't want me, and go to a school where I don't fit in." The white giraffe watched her warily. He didn't respond. Instead, he sidled restlessly out of range, so she could no longer touch him. Perhaps, Martine thought, he was waiting for a sign that he could trust her. And who could blame him? If she wanted to get close to him, the first thing she was going to have to do was prove to him that she was a friend. But how? Then it came to her. In England, her mom and dad had a poster in their bedroom of a dove being released into a sunset. On it was written, "If you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was." Martine could remember it as if it were yesterday, her mom's voice reading it aloud to her and then saying with a smile, "Isn't that wonderful, Martine?" And it's true. The more you love something, the more you have to give it space to find its own way in the world. That way, you'll know that if it comes back to you, it's because it truly cares for you. As miraculous as it was that she'd found the white giraffe, Martine knew she had to walk away from him. She took a last lingering look at him. Her heart ached as if she were losing a friend she'd only just made, but somehow she knew they'd meet again. For reasons she didn't fully understand, she felt as if their souls were already entwined. "Thank you for saving my life, Jeremiah," she said, adding hopefully, "See you soon." With that, she began picking her way through the mud to the grassy track. She was a bit hazy on the fate of the cobra, but she hoped it was either extremely dead or cowering in its burrow. She wasn't sure she would survive another encounter with it. She was almost there when a twig snapped like a firecracker in the darkness. Martine had never been much of an athlete, but she was on the verge of sprinting like an Olympian for the house when she spotted a reflection in the water. The white giraffe was following her. She pretended to walk on. The mirrored giraffe stepped gracefully after her, his white gold coat and silvery patches flowing across the steely water like an elegant ghost. Martine paused. The white giraffe paused. She continued. The white giraffe continued. She swung around abruptly. The giraffe slid to an awkward stop in the mud. He contemplated Martine from his great height. He seemed inquisitive now, rather than afraid. Martine craned her neck and tried to read his expression. She decided that it was like gazing into the eyes of the wisest creature on earth, and the most innocent at the same time. Her overwhelming impression was one of gentleness. She waited to see what the giraffe would do. At first, nothing happened, but then he lowered his head, inch by inch, until his slender nose was close enough to touch. Again, Martine smelled his clean, newly cut grass scent. She longed to put her palm against his satin white jaw, but she forced herself to stay still. Then, something extraordinary happened. The giraffe rested his head on Martine's shoulder and made a low, musical fluttering sound. For one perfect moment they stood there, the small girl and the white giraffe, mirrored in the moonlit water. It was only a minute, but it was long enough for the emotions and confusion of the past weeks to leave Martine in a rush and suffuse her with a feeling of contentment. She knew then that she'd come home. A lion roared. In the eerily quiet aftermath of the storm, the sound blasted through the night as the beast was about to pounce on them. Martine and the giraffe were in full flight in opposite directions before either of them had given the matter any conscious thought. There were no goodbyes. By the time she'd reached the safety of the garden, the white giraffe had vanished as if he had never been. So, this mythical creature, Martine has finally met, and seems like they formed a bit of a bond, but let's keep reading. Chapter 10. Back in her room, Martine fell into an exhausted sleep. When her alarm woke her at 6, she forced herself to spring out of bed, pull on her wet, muddy jeans, and rush out into the early morning sunlight, pausing only to splash icy water on her face. She knew she had to find an excuse for the state of her clothes. By the time her grandmother emerged to feed Shaka at 6:30, Martine was on her knees in the vegetable garden, weeding furiously. Gwen Thomas could hardly believe her eyes. "Whatever are you doing, child?" she asked. "You're absolutely filthy." "I'm just trying to clear the weeds away from these carrots," Martine said brightly. "I've been doing some thinking, and I've realized that I need to start helping you a bit more around the house." "Well," said her grandmother, Well, thank you, Martine." Neither of them mentioned the fight of the evening before. However, Gwen Thomas, who generally served up an unchanging breakfast of boiled eggs and toast, made Martine a special treat of fresh papaya and mango, a South African porridge called jungle oats, and homemade bread with Cape gooseberry jam. Martine was just savoring the last incredible bite when Alex Dupree's gray Land Rover came roaring up the drive. Martine scowled. She'd only met the game warden once, but she disliked him on sight. He was what her mom would have described as a snake oil salesman, overfamiliar and full of insincere patter. He gave her the creeps. She couldn't believe he had any empathy with animals. His freckled face, topped by a shock of strawberry blonde hair, appeared at the front door. "Good morning, Mrs. Thomas, Martine," he said breezily. "How are you ladies on this beautiful day?" "Very well, thank you, Alex," said her grandmother, smiling. "What brings you here so early?" "Ma'am, I'm just heading into Storm Crossing to buy some zebra feed. I know you've got a lot to do, so I thought it might be helpful if I gave Martine a lift to school today." "Why, Alex, it most certainly would. I've got the vet arriving first thing to check on Shaka and the 2 buffaloes who had that awful fight yesterday, and a party of 24 Swedish businessmen coming at 10. I really do appreciate your thoughtfulness. Wait a moment while I get her packed lunch." Martine's heart sank. She trailed out of the door after Alex's stocky frame. Once on the road, Alex started up a stream of boring chatter in his thick South African accent. Martine, who wanted nothing more than to lose herself in a dreamy reverie about her encounter with the White Giraffe the previous night. He followed her and rested his satiny head on her shoulder. Gave him a series of one-word answers, but it didn't seem to discourage him. "You're a smart little thing, aren't you?" he said as they stopped at the single traffic light in Storm Crossing. "I bet you're much better than I was at schoolwork." "I'm 11, Martine said rudely. "Don't talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old. A sly look came across Alex's face. "Okay," he said, "if that's the way you want to play it. You haven't by any chance come across a white giraffe at Sawubana, have you, Martine?" Martine did her best to keep the shock from showing on her face. "The white giraffe doesn't exist," she answered. "Everybody knows that." Alex put his hand in his pocket and took out Martine's precious flashlight. He threw it on the cracked leather seat beside her. She itched to pick it up, but didn't dare. Alex gave a cruel laugh. "Be like that, then." He put the flashlight back in his pocket. "The thing is, Martine, the white giraffe, if it did exist, would be very, very valuable. Your grandmother, for instance, would really benefit from the sale of such an animal. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars here, not chicken feed. Now, I would hate to think that you would jeopardize the future of everyone on Sawubana by poking around in things that are none of your business. How do you think your grandmother would feel about that?" Martine was livid. How dare he talk about Jemmy as if he were just another animal to be hunted down and turned into money? She was pretty sure her grandmother didn't know about his ideas either. "And how do you think my grandmother would know if she knew about your little secret?" she retaliated, just to test him. Alex's blue eyes blazed. He pulled into the school, slammed on the brakes, and reached across her to open the door. "My girl," he said. "You are playing with fire now," he said grimly. "And you know what happens to people who play with fire." Martine tried to be strong until she was out of the Jeep, but as soon as she turned away from him, the tears began to pour down her face. His laughter followed her all the way across the schoolyard. So Alex Dupree's showing his true colors here, the game warden, and he seems to know that Martine has been in the game reserve because that flashlight that he dropped, he had in his Jeep, and not being super kind to her, and trying to threaten and intimidate her. So we will see what happens next time we read. Have a great day. Enjoy the sunshine.